Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of this season. Today, my guest and I will cover a topic that is probably long overdue when you realize how many people actually suffer from this issue, and that is postpartum depression. According to the CDC, quote, about 1 in 8 women with a recent live birth experience symptoms of postpartum depression, end quote. And that's not a light number. So, to put that into perspective, that means that basically every eighth woman that you meet who has given birth has also suffered from postpartum depression. That's 12.5% of mothers in the United States. I wanted to do this episode because there are a lot of things that people just don't understand about postpartum depression. I'm sure that many people have heard of it at some point in their life, but even I wasn't fully aware of the repercussions and consequences of PPD until I watched this full-length documentary on just how serious it is. And it totally changed my perspective on what people go through as mothers. It's not the same thing as baby blues, and it does not just go away after a few weeks of having your baby. It's a very heavy, serious battle for the women who deal with it. So I'm happy to have someone here who can share a direct experience with all of you. My guest this week is Jasmine Garde, and she will be sharing her unique experience with postpartum depression. She recently had a baby just 9 short months ago, and she still deals with many symptoms of PPD to this day. So, Jasmine, could you just briefly introduce yourself and start by sharing some of the details of your pregnancy before you actually had Frankie, and then just sort of where your mental health was at during all the stages of your pregnancy, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Jasmine Garde. I'm 26 years old and I'm born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada. I am really first I want to say I was really fortunate to have a very healthy pregnancy in the physical sense. A lot of women have to worry about their battle with like high blood pressure or um just like more like pregnancy complications. So I was really fortunate in that aspect. Me and my fiance actually tried for Frankie for about a year and a half. So I was extremely happy when I got pregnant and I was really, really excited to be a mother. Um, Pregnancy, I really thought I was going to be one of those women that loved every moment of it. Like, I genuinely thought that I was going to have the constant pregnancy glow and I was going to be in love with my baby bump and in love with my new body. And unfortunately, it just was the total opposite. I worked throughout my pregnancy. I still did nails to kind of keep me busy in the beginning of it. The first trimester was pretty rough. I was pretty sick for most of it. And the second and third trimester, I actually had prepartum depression. So I got diagnosed that by my OBGYN toward the end of my first semester and into my second semester. And that was kind of a struggle in itself just because I feel like it almost felt like I was robbed of like my ideal pregnancy experience. And I tried not to have too much of an expectation, but that's a little difficult, right? Like it's difficult to not have this idea of what you want your pregnancy to be. So I did struggle with my mental health there. A lot of anxiety about if I was going to be a good mom, constant anxiety about the health of my baby, even though I had a healthy pregnancy, just constant worry and anguish, constantly counting baby kicks when, overdoing the counting of baby kicks. And I was really exhausted a lot because I did a lot of masking, I would say, because I was working and I did try to stay social. And in those like environments, I kind of would put up this front because I don't like to broadcast if I'm not okay, like publicly, especially if it's not like an intimate relationship with that person. So, yeah, just a lot of like masking and a lot of, I wouldn't say faking it, but just putting on this like image that I was okay when I wasn't feeling okay for a long time.
So it started for you early then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I haven't heard of prepartum depression. So
Mm-hmm. Or
that,
pregnancy depression or
yeah. So basically, you kind of already knew from the get go that you were going to struggle after the baby too.
Yeah.
Okay.
That I was at a higher like risk of struggling with postpartum depression.
Right. So that's my next question is people who struggle or struggled with mental health before getting pregnant, like, even if it's not during pregnancy, if it's like, just through the course of your life, people who struggled with depression before are at a higher risk of postpartum depression once they do have a child.
Yeah.
So did you struggle with mental health too before you got pregnant, or is that something that kind of popped up during your pregnancy?
Yeah, I actually I have. I do struggle with mental health, and I have for a long time of my life. I've actually been in and out of therapy since I was a kid. So I feel like I've been very well aware of like the status of my mental health, not necessarily like diagnosis per se, but like recognizing when I'm not in like in a good mental state. And like I said, I was in therapy, so I'm lucky enough to like have had like resources and find like coping mechanisms and stuff like that. But I didn't have the most like healthy upbringing, the most healthy family life. And I have like a long family history of mental health struggles as well. Some of it is bipolar, some of it is extreme like major depressive syndrome. Um what else? Like ADHD, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just kind of like a melting pot of all kinds
Right.
of mental struggles.
The irony of you wearing a self-care hat
I know,
now,
right?
as we talk about that. So because you were kind of aware of mental health, and it's good that at least you were, dealing with this early on, because obviously mental health is something that is becoming more popular and taken more seriously in our generation than it was like in previous generations.
Right.
But so because you were aware of this and in therapy and stuff, were you aware of what PPD was before you were getting pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
And were you nervous about it affecting you, or was it like a thought in the back of your head, or did it not become real until you started to feel depressed?
Okay, so this one's a little bit more complicated because I would say that I like to like research a lot, right? So if I'm feeling a certain way, like I like to like try to research. I try not to self-diagnose, but I try to like research a lot of like what I'm feeling and like try to identify or understand a little bit more about it. And so by becoming pregnant and stuff like that, knowing that, like you said, if you do have mental health struggles before, you have a higher chance of it, during. So I did try to stay on top of that by like doing my own research. But at the same time, you don't want to decide that that's going to be your journey.
Right.
You want to try to be as present.
Bias.
Yeah, exactly. So I did my best to, I guess, take notes and like mentally prepare for what was possible without deciding that that's what it was until I was experiencing it.
Right. In psychology, it's called, I actually mislabeled it. It's not confirmation bias. It's self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh.
So people do this thing where the example that we learned about in school is like, let's say you're a nervous, anxious, introverted person and your friends want you to come to a party. And you're telling them like, no, like I really don't want to go because like I'm going to go and I'm going to end up in a corner by myself and you guys are going to ditch me and like leave me alone and no one's going to be friendly to me. And they're like, no, like just come, like let's just go. And so like you go, and then when you get there, you have this idea of what it's going to be like. And so then you start acting in a way that
right,
like attracts that response
like it's
from
almost
other
like
people.
decided, and then like you said, it just kind of like happens.
Yeah, so once you're there, like maybe you're being unfriendly, maybe you're being short with people, maybe you aren't putting yourself out there,
or
right?
like you project that in general,
right?
Like,
and so
fear.
Then you turn to your friends and you're like, "See, I told you that this was what was going to happen," but you're actually the one that brought that onto yourself,
right?
It's a little bit more complicated with mental health.
No, but that makes sense, and that's something that I really didn't want to do to myself. Like I didn't want to just like decide I had postpartum depression before I actively had it.
Right.
So,
do you know if there's other women in your family that struggled specifically with postpartum depression, or did you maybe like grow up in a house where they didn't talk much about feelings or didn't get help with mental health
I've
issues?
actually never even thought about that. Like my even though like I'm aware of like my parents, my family's like mental health history, my mom is very like she likes to power through things and she doesn't like to dwell. She doesn't like to speak on dwelling about certain things. And so she's never sat me down and talked to me about her struggle with pregnancy or her struggle with postpartum. to get a little bit off topic, but might kind of like pull it together. I my like childhood was kind of abusive, and she went through that abuse too. And so it took a lot for her to like get out of that. So I can actually only imagine that she probably did struggle with that lack of support and verbal and physical abuse either during or shortly after pregnancy as well. Like I can't imagine that it just started,
It
you
didn't
know.
affect her.
Exactly.
Yeah. We probably had really similar childhoods.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly what you went through, and I wouldn't say that like I had an abusive childhood.
Mm-hmm.
But generational trauma is passed down, right?
Yeah.
Like they're doing a bunch of studies now that show that it's actually in our DNA to some extent. I haven't like read that thoroughly and how that research breaks down and stuff, but there's a definite connection between if your parents went through trauma and if, you know, you went, now you're being affected by that trauma. Because there's no way to like totally and entirely heal from that. Like sometimes people just get dealt a shitty card, and you know, we're kind of left to pick up the pieces a little bit. So but for sure, you know, if your mom went through like an abusive childhood, she probably dealt with depression, anxiety, and just didn't put a label on it, right? Because they weren't taught.
She was also from the Philippines, right? Born and
Okay.
raised in the Philippines. So there's that cultural difference as well, where, you know, mental health really isn't as like talked about within that culture in itself. And like a lot of like traditional Asian households, especially being born and raised in that country, there wasn't a lot of like light shined like on that topic for her to really like get that support or get that understanding or knowledge off of. So her way of coping really was just powering through things, you know what I mean? And like looking on the brighter side of things. And she's a strong woman because of it. And like you said, because of like generational trauma, like there is no way to just stop it. Like you don't really know. It's like what do they call it? Like breaking the generational curse.
Yeah, breaking the cycle or
Right.
whatever. Yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's really common too. When I took a human sexuality course my senior year of college, and in that course you touch on a lot more than just sexuality. So there was a unit on postpartum depression, and that's where I watched like this documentary on PPD and just how severe it is and like how it's a spectrum. And so after I watched that, I texted my mom and I had asked her like, did you ever go through postpartum like with me or with like anyone, like I have two younger brothers. um and she said no, but like your aunt did, and I knew that my aunt had gone through it. She went through it really really bad. Like textbook definition of postpartum depression. And she's shared with me like over the course of the years how hard it was on her and how it affected her relationship, like with her daughter, and like all her marriage, like all these different things. So I'm glad to, you know, have had the like experience from her to share with me, because in the event that I do decide to have kids, get pregnant, have a baby and stuff, I have a feeling that there's a chance I could be affected by it because I already struggle with mental health now. And having that person who's open with you and shares that with you is like so important, because it makes you feel like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy for this.
It
I'm
gives
not
you a
weird
resource.
for
It
this.
gives you a community and you know, a form of like support. It's really important for
Right.
sure.
Was there a specific moment where you were going through this and you realized like, oh, I'm sad, or was it like a gradual realization that you were going to have a hard time with this? I know you mentioned that you had like the prepartum depression,
Right.
so you can maybe start there even and be
Right.
like, did you have this like eye-opening moment where you're like, fuck? Or was it more like starting to chip away at you?
I don't know if it was. I think it was kind of like a chipping away kind of feeling. Like, I was experiencing like what a typical pregnant person would when it comes to like, you know, like counting baby kicks and getting kind of nervous and like, but that OCD part of me, like my obsessive part over like the negative feelings took over, and it almost never went away. And for me, I think that was the difference. Like instead of kind of like riding the wave of like the good and bad of pregnancy, I was kind of like obsessed with the bad without having the control of it. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
just constantly worried or constantly anxious, or I had pretty bad like body dysmorphia too. Like just like I never got used to this new body that I thought I was gonna just be absolutely in love with. Um, so when it came to like pregnancy, that was that. But when it came to postpartum, the lines are kind of blurry just because I went through like my dog passed away 2 days after I gave birth, and he was dying during my pregnancy, but he was old, he was really sick, and so it didn't come by surprise, but obviously it affects you, you know what I mean? It affects any person, let alone someone who just like had an extreme change in hormones.
Right.
So I was like already like in the morning of him, like losing him, while trying to like figure out motherhood. So was it baby blues? Was it the fact that I was really depressed already like with my dog, or I feel like that kind of transitioned into like postpartum depression. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So it wasn't necessarily like a random day. Like I was already just like immediately really heartbroken, and that heartbroken feeling didn't go away. Then I got overwhelmed, and um not necessarily, I didn't feel disconnected from my baby, but I felt that he wasn't connected to me.
Yeah.
And that was like a huge fear too, and then it kind of just spiraled into a postpartum depression.
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously like a really unique situation. There's
Mhm.
like this new life, and then you're also mourning a death at the
Yeah.
same time. So that's just like really confusing for anybody to go
Yeah.
through in general. Um, what did like the worst stage of your postpartum look like in terms of the depression? Like, how did you know you were at like a really low point?
I think it was about a month in, like past the baby blues, like kind of like phase. I guess they say it's like a like 5 days to like 2 weeks is like your baby blues, like getting your body to kind of balance out on their own on its own. And it definitely didn't. It didn't. So I feel like I was like a month in. I just have this specific memory that like Frankie was just crying, and he was crying all night. And like you see these videos where like women like hold their babies and their babies just immediately stop crying, like they're immediately comforted, and I felt like I couldn't do that with him. Like I felt like no matter how I held him, no matter how I rocked him or how I soothed him or how many times I fed him, like latched him, he would not stop bawling. And then those thoughts started to like set in, where I was like, am I doing something wrong? Am I not a good like fit for him? Is he not connected? Does he not even know that I'm his mom? So yeah, I would say about like a month in, and about a month's worth of like not sleeping
Yeah.
is what really set that in.
Um, how did that affect like your relationship with him? Did you feel like, so you said that you like wanted to connect to him and were trying to connect to him,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes in like in that documentary that I watched, and in the case with my aunt, they were like disconnected from their baby. Like they just felt like they didn't have the energy to give to the baby to connect with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like on your end there was some more so some anxiety about him not connecting to you. Like the
Yeah.
effort was there, you were putting the energy in,
Mm-hmm.
but you were scared that he wasn't going to um feel close to you, which I think sounds to me like that's a sign of like, the mental disorder is that you
Mm-hmm.
tell yourself things that
Yeah.
aren't true.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that that's one way that the postpartum affected your relationship with your baby, but in what other ways did it affect your relationship with
Um,
Frankie?
well, like I said, I was like really nervous that like I wasn't like equipped to be his mom. Um, I had it took about a month before my mom and my sister, they were a lot of help to me in the beginning, which I that village is really, really important. Um, but it took about a month before my mom was like, okay, like I'm gonna go home now. So like you got this. Like you don't need me here. Like you can take care of him on his own on your own. And I was genuinely terrified to do that. Like not just about not knowing like what to do, but not necessarily knowing like if I was good enough to do it. Like that would be like my biggest struggle that I had with him. Like I just felt like I wasn't worthy of being his mom. And when she was helping me, I would pass the baton to her because she would soothe him. She like would get that immediate response to kind of like calm him down. And so I kind of like leaned on that, and I feel like that kind of like played into it a little bit more, where I felt like I wasn't worthy, I wasn't doing a good enough job. My mom knows how to do it, and by like letting her do it like for so long, it kind of like created this like fear of me doing it without her help. You know what I mean? Um yeah, I guess like the biggest feeling that I had was just feeling like I wasn't good enough for him,
Yeah.
and that I didn't I didn't have like, you know, you read stories where like you fear like you're going to hurt yourself or hurt your baby or stuff like that. And even though I struggle with pain within myself, or like, you know, in the past I've like struggled with like, I don't know, it might get a little dark, but like self-harming struggles and stuff like that. I think things like that arose again. Things like that started to trigger within me. Those were feelings that I started to get that I haven't felt in a pretty long time postpartum. So I got very like trigger, like I worked up through like him crying for a very long time, me not having enough sleep, me feeling just too guilty, like just feeling like I wasn't good enough, or the fact that I really wanted someone else to take care of him so that I can like not panic anymore. That made me feel guilty.
Yeah.
You know, like constantly passing him off to my mom while she was there made me feel bad that I wasn't trying hard enough, or maybe I wasn't trying hard enough, or again, like, does he think my mom's his mom and not me? Like, just all these crazy thoughts like went into my head during that time.
Yeah, in that documentary, this is the like the thing that shocked me the most about that documentary that I watched, and you guys should all check it out if you have the chance or you want more information on PPD. It's called When the Bow Breaks, but it's a documentary about postpartum depression more broadly. It's made by a group of women that struggled with it. Brooke Shields is like the executive producer and stuff. She's like a famous actress, or I can't remember, musician or something. Um, and it interviews these women, what you're talking about, where they harm themselves or their baby or both. It's
Right.
called postpartum psychosis. So it's separate even
Like
from
a
it's a
deeper
part.
layer.
Yeah, it's like the far end of the spectrum. And women went to prison because they killed their baby in a psychotic state. Like they were literally, it's like you become schizophrenic. Like you're seeing things and hearing things, and you think that you're doing your baby a favor by taking them out of this world, and
Right.
you're not good enough. So I think there was a case or two where the mother killed her baby and herself. And then there were a few where the mom just killed the baby, and then they're interviewing them throughout like the documentary about what was going on and what was happening. And there's obviously when we're talking about like legislation or like in law enforcement, there's not a deep enough understanding or a way to recognize that this is what's happening, right? They just see this woman as like a cold-blooded killer.
And that's it.
Yeah, they think it's just a crazy person that killed their baby, and not realizing that it's a normal person in a psychotic state because they have such severe postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And so it was really sad, like, to hear. You can see how choked up the moms are about it. Like, imagine living through that. You know what I mean? Like, and having to come to terms with the fact and not hate yourself after. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have the compassion for themselves, the sympathy for themselves to realize like that wasn't me.
Yeah.
Right? So they're interviewing one of the women, and she seems like she's doing better, and like she's married, and she's still choked up about her daughter. But they tell you at the end of the documentary that before they even finished filming, she had committed suicide after like dealing with the guilt of what she had done in a psychotic state. So it's a really, really serious thing. When the Bow Breaks.
When the Bow Breaks.
And it just like completely changed my perspective on it.
That's crazy.
It's really sad. It's really eye-opening, but it makes you realize like what
the depth of
women go through to create life. Like how hard it is on you physically and mentally.
Even if you were to take take out like all these like environmental factors, right? The lack of sleep. Let's say like I'm lucky that I had support, but some women don't have support. Some people don't have like a supporting relationship. They're not getting their full meals a day, like whatever the case may be. Like you have to like take into account that we physically grew life. We almost I don't want to say pregnancy is deteriorating, but we are physically giving parts of ourselves in order to create this new human. And then that human is ripped out of your body, and then you're just kind of left with this lack of hormones that you used to have, or more hormones than you did have before. And you're just like, you're handed like a Tylenol after going through a very traumatic experience with your body, because you can't be given pain medication because you have to take care of life. So you're given this really low dose painkiller and told to take care of a new life, So to have like any type of expectation, or to not like have, I don't know, like for society to not realize how, even though it's extremely natural, how serious pregnancy and postpartum actually can be, just based off of like the chemical imbalances that happen within your body, is a really serious thing. Like it's actually really crazy. And that's not even involving all the other, factors that play into giving birth and being pregnant and stuff.
Right. And the thing that was most, like, after processing that documentary, watching it, accumulating all this new information, it made me, like, my mind was blown at the lack of care there is for mothers after having a baby in our country, right? So in terms of paid leave, we're like the only first world country on the globe that doesn't offer like a substantial amount of paid maternal leave after someone has a baby. A lot of countries offer paid paternal leave too, so that both parents can be there to take care of the child after birth. I think in our country it's like 2 weeks or something.
Right.
And obviously that differs based on different companies or whoever you work for. But the fact that it's not like a universal, just understood thing, after seeing what, like let's say you're like a perfectly normal, healthy mother, where like not normal, but basically everything goes really smooth, right? You have a really stable relationship, you have lots of support, you're not experiencing postpartum depression at all, right? Your body still
is in recovery. It just went through a very, I can literally say I felt like my body, like I got hit by a truck.
Yeah.
Like just walking the next day, like after all the anxiety and all the adrenaline kind of like goes away, you actually feel like you just got out of surgery. Like no man has ever gone through surgery and like not been given like pain medication and like sent back to work just like within like a week. You know what I mean? Like no one, and just because like women give birth and it's such a natural thing, there's that expectation for us to just like go through the trauma and then deal with it. The physical trauma, that is, you know what I mean? And like you said, that's just based off of like a totally healthy situation for that woman.
Yeah. I feel like it's something that needs to be taught. The only reason I learned about that is because I took a really specific course that covered human sexuality, that happened to incorporate like PPD in it, right? But if more people had an understanding, whether it was, people in law enforcement or people like politicians, people that make laws, people that head corporations, like more people need to understand exactly what goes into it, right? I'm sure like a lot of people, like we give life, right? That's how the human species continues on. So I'm sure like people see it, but they don't really see it. You know what I mean? Unless
there's
you
like
have
a very extreme lack of compassion when it comes to it, just because it's so normal. It's so healthy. Like it's so like a part of, like how, like you said, like how the world works is we give birth and we continue life. And so the expectation for us to just deal because we've been dealing forever is sad, because there is that lack of compassion for something that really is traumatic, healthy or not healthy. You know?
And then imagine on top of dealing with like postpartum depression and then being expected to just jump back into your regular life after, you're struggling with maybe like an identity crisis. Like, am I going to be a good mom? Who am I now that I am a mom, and do I change as a person now that I'm a mom? Maybe feeling guilty about going back to work when you should be with your baby, like already struggling, and then just being expected to carry
and like
on.
being told to like put that on a shelf,
Yeah.
like, you know, just deal. Yeah, it sucks for sure.
So you mentioned feeling guilty.
Yeah.
While struggling with postpartum depression. That's like a very common trend that like they talk about in that documentary. I've heard it from my aunt. I've heard it from a lot of different people who have struggled with postpartum depression, because there's all of these stereotypes and social stigmas about how women are supposed to be as mothers.
Yeah.
So if they can't meet the societal expectations because they're struggling with postpartum depression, it oftentimes exacerbates the depression even more. It literally, it's like a negative feedback
You
loop,
literally compare yourself to like the ideal situations like that you see either on TV or what women choose to promote online, which I think everyone kind of like falls flat when it comes to that. Like they want to broadcast like what they want to broadcast. You know what I mean? People don't like broadcast their true experiences. So it's easy to sit there and compare your experience to someone else. But yeah, like you have this idea of like I said, I thought that I was gonna be my baby's home off the bat. I thought I was gonna lay him on my chest and like he would never cry, kind of thing. Like I thought that I was just gonna know what to do, how to feed him, how to soothe him, you know. I thought that he would like recognize my scent immediately and just like be at peace or be at comfort in my arms. And that's just, it's not the case. Like, you know, these babies are little humans and they have their own feelings. They're navigating their own world. And so it is really difficult because I really did have this idea of what motherhood was going to be immediately. And I didn't experience that immediately, you know?
So you felt most of your guilt stemmed from comparing yourself to like other moms and stuff like
yeah,
that.
I guess comparing myself to like the idea of what I thought motherhood was going to be like. And I don't want to say like I love my son and like I do feel all these feelings for him, and it takes practice at the end of the day. Like I think that I didn't give myself compassion. I think a lot of moms don't give themselves compassion and patience and grace because we're learning something for the first time too. Like I literally, how am I supposed to know how to be a mom? I've never been a mom before. You know what I mean? And I can say that now, but in these moments, I mean, just freaking last night, Frankie was crying in my arms. I tried to put him down for bed and he started crying. So I held him and he didn't stop crying. He literally cried in my arms for like 45 minutes, just straight wailing. And he's 9 months old now, you know what I mean? And that moment, I literally just was looking at him in complete silence, like, what am I doing wrong? Like, I don't understand. Like, why? How are you not comforted right now? You're fed, you're washed, like you played. I know you're tired, you know. So like, how are you not instinctually comforted and just going to sleep? So it really is like just trying to go through the motions of it. But I think a lot of it did just stem from, like you said, like comparing myself from I think like either like other relationships that I saw online or what I was hoping my relationship would be right off the bat, or I guess what's just like promoted societally, like what you see like in movies and like different posts and stuff like that. You just have this idea and it just really humbles you when it's not what happens immediately.
Yeah. Especially if you're coming from like a childhood of your own where you don't want to fuck them up the same way.
Oh my God. I think that was the biggest thing too, is I was really, really, really scared that I was continuing something. Except this is an infant. Like, obviously I'm not, like now, like in this state right now, being present with you, like I can say I'm not. But in those moments where your baby's wailing and like nothing, you feel like nothing's going right and you're exhausted. Like in the beginning, I probably didn't sleep longer than 2.5 hours for the first 4 months. Like it was extremely difficult and my appetite was down a lot, which I was breastfeeding. They say that your appetite goes up, but I think because I was struggling with my postpartum, I wasn't hungry, and it actually played a role with me like losing so much weight so fast. I did work out. I did like do my best to like take care of myself physically. But I think the main part of it was my lack of like diet and like eating and actually like nurturing myself, because I just didn't have the appetite, because I was just like, my postpartum was so bad, that like the want to eat just like wasn't even naturally there. So yeah, like the lack of sleep and everything, and just like not like clicking immediately, like not getting the motherhood thing down immediately, really like affected that mental state when it came to my postpartum with him.
Yeah. As you're saying all this, like the first thing that I think about, do you know who Tammy Hembrow is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she just had her baby. She has 3 kids now. But for those of you who don't know, she's like this I guess like an influencer, but she was like an influencer before it became a big thing, like in like 2014, 2015. She has like a fitness brand. She's like a fitness person. And I followed her for a few years, so I've seen her like go through the different pregnancies. Um, and she obviously is like very wealthy, very healthy. She has like what she advertises as a very healthy relationship. And that's great for her. You know what I mean? She absolutely loves being pregnant, and you can tell. She's constantly posting about it. She's talking about like she just had her baby, so she's talking about how excited she is for her it's a baby girl, for her to be home, how she's connecting with her. She's posting these pictures with like her family, like she's like obviously on a high, which is like amazing, right? Like that's the ideal situation, is to be healthy and happy and feel content.
People like that I watch and that you have, that gives you this idea.
Right. And that's where it can be you know, I don't want to say someone else's joy is toxic, because that's not at all what I'm saying. But it's like when you have someone that has that much influence and you don't ever see the bad side of things,
right,
it can make you feel abnormal with anything. Like with being a 15-year-old girl and scrolling through and seeing all these models, and or being a guy and going through like following all the Gymshark people or whatever, you know, guys get insecure about. Like when you're constantly consuming people at their best, it makes you feel like your worst is abnormal, or it's worse than it is.
I think that we all like struggle, not struggle with that, but I feel like we all like fall flat by doing things like that. You know, like I feel now I'm nobody's nobody. Okay, like my page is not like poppin' or anything like that. We all have Instagram. I don't have like a high anything. But if you were to look at my page, I don't think I don't advertise being like struggling with mental health whatsoever. I don't like advertise the raw like struggles of my pregnancy. I didn't advertise like, I would say if you didn't know me, you would think the same things. You know what I mean? So I think that I like also play into that like, I don't want to, is it toxic positivity culture? Like whatever you want to call it. I also play into,
of course,
not wanting to like, I want to show my best self all the time. But, you know, who knows? Like maybe Tammy Hembrow herself is struggling without wanting to market it because she is such an influencer. You know, you just never know. Like you never know what's actually going on behind the screen, because we're so busy wanting to show our best selves to the world.
Yeah. I mean, and it's hard to be vulnerable. So like I completely understand that. And you know, as far, we're all guilty of what you're talking about, right? Where you're putting your best self out there. Obviously people aren't taking pictures, selfies in bed, right? Like posted up right before they're about to go to sleep, and like, you know, like your most presentable version of yourself online. I do like throughout me having social media, especially like on my Instagram, that's just what I use the most of. I've tried to be more open and authentic and vulnerable. So I have a few posts throughout my feed where I'm just telling people I'm not fucking doing good. Like, and it's not abnormal for you to not do good. There's one post that I made actually in early 2020, before I had even hit my lowest low. Like it was like February of 2020 and I was already struggling. And I made this post about, you know, I'm not doing well, and it seems like there's a lot of people right now that aren't doing well. And so I'm just sharing that, because like how scary is it to think that feeling sad is abnormal? You know, like that's that negative feedback loop where you feel like shit for feeling like shit,
right?
And you continue to feel like more shit,
right?
So you know, it's hard to be vulnerable like in a culture of social media because one, people like aren't always nice.
Mm-hmm.
Like it
There's a
creates.
lot of really bad stigma about struggling with mental health
Yeah.
too. Like the word crazy. Like that's a
Yes.
really, really big one that even though it's said so passively, it might not be said with a lot of depth. People that actually struggle with mental health disorders take it and like really, really internalize that and then don't want to be vulnerable with their mental health, don't want to like admit that they are struggling and that they need a community either to connect with or lean on, or just like more people that are, like you said, like by posting that, it probably reached more people that weren't okay and to feel like less alone while being not okay, which is important, feeling like you're not alone
Right.
while, going through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I just encourage people to be more vulnerable. I do it a lot of times. I'm not super serious all of the time. I have a lot of serious posts throughout my
Mm-hmm.
feed, like every once in a while. But usually I'm like joking about it, like
Yeah.
about being just fucked up mentally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is not always a healthy coping mechanism, but it's always like, it's also like a lighthearted way of being like, hey,
There's no wrong way,
yeah,
I feel,
like,
to like cope with your struggles. I feel like laughing off your pain is super normal,
I mean, I do
honestly.
think there's like unhealthy ways. So I'm not going to say there's no wrong way to deal with your struggle because I know a lot of people that cope in unhealthy ways like repressing or passive aggressiveness, or people like your mom who have been through so much, or
Mm-hmm.
anyone who's been through so much, and they're like, "Oh, I don't cry." Or
Right.
I you're being too sensitive, or
Mm-hmm.
like projecting their shit onto other people
Yeah.
because they're scared to be vulnerable. Like, I do think there are wrong ways to deal with it.
Yeah, that's true.
um but only if it's like in excess. Like
Right.
anything in moderation. Sometimes we have bad
I
days.
think when you're at risk of hurting yourself or others, either by projection or like internalizing certain things, like whatever, obviously that is like at risk. I think something as light as like joking about your own struggles in order for you to deal with them, I feel like is not the most abnormal or
Right.
unhealthy,
Right. There's
way of dealing.
some that are
Yeah,
worse than others for
for
sure.
sure.
Um yeah, that was just like, me posting memes about mental health, or
Yeah.
me like, anyone who's been on my close friends list over the last 5 years
Literally.
is fully aware of like, that's where I really just fucking show
Let it
everything. I
go.
just let it go. Like, here, you guys deal with it now. But yeah, so I think people should be more like, if social media is not going anywhere,
Mhm.
it's gonna be here.
Mhm.
So there's a way to transform that platform, or these platforms, no different than like trends catch on, like on TikTok or on anything. Like, there's a way to turn that platform into something that's more real and more
I feel
authentic.
like there's also this fear, maybe it's just like my own fear, but maybe other people can relate to it, where if you are too vulnerable, like I don't ever want to, I mean, social media is all about seeking attention no matter what, but I don't want to try to like seek pity.
Same,
I
exactly.
like fear that. And maybe it's because I'm my mom's daughter and like that was kind of like passed down to me where like I don't want the fake pity or I don't want the fake empathy. Like I don't want ingenuine. I don't want anyone to like look at me as like
It's
a
weak.
sad situation or like yeah, for sure.
Well,
Like
that's a part of, that's you admitting your own,
mhm.
internal struggle, that
Mhm.
most people who don't openly talk about mental health, the reason they don't is because they don't want to be perceived as weak.
Yeah.
That's how it was in my house
Yeah.
too. So I think our generation's doing a good job of kind of like letting the association between being weak and struggling with mental health, letting that go.
Yeah.
But it's so deeply seated in so many people that it's like the worst thing they could do is be emotional, is cry, is
Right.
ask for help, say I'm not doing
Mhm.
well, because they think that's a form of failure. I had to overcome that, over, a period of years where I was like, okay, I'm not doing well. And if I don't do something about it, like, I don't know what's going to happen to me.
Right.
So you have to hit this point that's past your ego. Unfortunately, I mean, that's how it was for me, where you're like, I mean, I have no pride at this point because I am literally that bad. Like, mentally, I am that bad.
You know, like, going back to, like, one of your first questions, like, when did you realize? I think my mom brought it to my attention, where she was like, I'm really, like, I'm worried about you. Like, the fact that I was constantly, like, passing the baby, like, not avoiding connection, but, like, feeling like I'm not going to connect, so, like, I can't try right now, and I'd rather just, like, wallow in, like, my negative feelings. She was the one who was like, yeah, you're gonna go see a psychiatrist. Like, I need you to go, you know, take care of your mental health because, like, you're not in a good place, and I can recognize that.
When the person that is not good at feelings,
oh my god, yeah,
is empathetic,
sure.
you know it's bad.
I mean, it's actually, like, ironic because, like, she, you know, like, off topic, but she works for a behavioral institute. It's literally called yeah um um Nevada Behavioral Institute in Nevada or something like that. And she's, like, the office administrator, so she doesn't actually do, like, the mental health work, but she works in the industry. So it's ironic, but yeah.
That's funny. We went on a little bit of a tangent there, but just to circle back around. So you said that despite your mom kind of struggling with her own feelings, that she and someone else was, like, your support system.
My sister.
Your sister?
My sister was extremely helpful.
Okay.
Too. I mean, of course, my fiance was. But that village that people talk about is extremely important, whether or not it is just your partner or other people. And so my sister and my mom were the main helps, for sure.
Right. And I was going to ask you, and kind of, you sort of answered it, I guess, right now. But, you know, I was going to ask if there were people that, you know, because when a baby comes into the world, there's all this focus on the new life, like, as there should be. You know, it's like we're just trying to make sure that this new life is healthy. But then your life kind of gets forgotten about a little bit. So did you have, you know, you said your mom, it was at a point though where it was noticeable, which I think is kind of past the point where it really helps.
I needed that help, yeah.
Yeah. So did you have anyone else that was, like, checking in on you, saying, how are you doing? How are you feeling mentally after all of this?
I guess just, like, my fiance and my sister, and they still do to this day. My sister still asks, like, how did you sleep? Are you eating enough? Like, little things like that, just to check in. But it really was mainly just, like, my family and my mom and my sister that really, really recognized it and then, like, kept up with it. So I'm really lucky for that reason.
Do they know that you struggle with postpartum, or did they know at the time? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
That helps too, you know. So
like I said, we're just kind of like a family of fucked up minds. So it wasn't, like, abnormal. Like, it didn't, like, hit them, you know, from, like, a left field. Like, they were like ready to be compassionate and, like, be there supporting wise for me.
What have you sort of done to manage your postpartum? Like, what are some of the healthy things that you've incorporated in your life?
In the beginning, I went to therapy. Like, right when I went to therapy first before I went and saw a psychiatrist. So that definitely helps. Therapy's amazing. I think everyone should. I think no one can suffer from going to therapy is, like, the best way that I can say. I'm not saying that every therapist is the right therapist for you, but it can't hurt you, you know? Right. And there is something to gain for everyone for it. So I saw a therapist. My partner really took over, like, the household things so I can try to connect with Frankie. So I could, like, just focus on just being a mom. So and I think that helped me cope too. Like, I really empathize for a lot of moms that, like, are stay-at-home moms in a very traditional sense, do all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the laundry, and then trying to take care of their baby. Like, my partner took care of that while I was able to take care of my baby, or at least really, really try. So that transition by him doing that, I think, was in itself its own coping mechanism. My therapist was really, really on me about working out. Like, I almost felt guilty if I didn't go and work out because those endorphins and stuff like that really help rebalance my hormones. So that did help. Yeah, I would say that. And actually going and seeing a psychiatrist was, like, the biggest game changer for me because I was actually, I'm going to, like, kind of trail off to, like, a different thing, but by going to him, I was diagnosed with everything. so I was like on the right medication for everything. So I got diagnosed with bipolar, and then I got diagnosed with ADHD, like officially. And so for that, it gave me like a breath of fresh air, right? So I felt like less crazy, like quote unquote. Like I felt less like, okay, so it's not just in my head. Like there is a part of me that is like not in my control, and it's not my fault for feeling these things. And by being on the right medication for those, um, it's kind of helped organize my postpartum depression as well. Like it's kind of helped put things into a clearer perspective where I'm not like over obsessing over certain things anymore. I used to have, oh, one of my biggest symptoms, actually, I don't know why I didn't mention this, was intrusive thoughts. That was the scariest for me, for sure, besides feeling guilty. So I remember, okay, like, I mean, intrusive, like the most irrational thoughts ever. And not just like traditional, like walking from your car with your baby and like being scared that you're going to get kidnapped, which was like every single time I went out in public was like a huge fear of mine. But every time that I was at a red light, I was constantly looking in the mirror because I constantly felt like someone was going to hit me from behind for no reason. Like the person could not even be moving. And I was constantly scared that someone was going to either like hit me from behind, bash in a window, like just constantly just like being like over aware. Or I was breastfeeding him and sorry, TMI, I used to have like my nipples pierced. So I had this fear that I was going to drown my baby.
Oh my god.
Just things that don't make sense, but like that's what intrusive thoughts are. Like things that like in a rational sense aren't realistic, but you're still scared of it. I remember taking my dogs to the park and I had him in a little baby carrier, and I held him the entire time while I was playing catch with my dogs because I was scared that ants were going to crawl into his carrier while he was there for like 10 minutes. Like I was just genuinely scared of like things like that. So by being put on these medications for like my OCD and for bipolar and for ADHD, it kind of like helped like diminish those thoughts or like at least put them down a little bit, or it helped me organize my depression from reality, you know?
Yeah. Do you feel like since doing all of these things that it's getting easier or that eventually it's going to subside?
I have hope that it'll subside. It's definitely gotten easier. I'm not saying that it's completely gone. Just because, like I said, I there are like a lot of late nights where I do like over obsess with negative thoughts and negative feelings that I shouldn't be anymore. And I think it comes with every woman that's a mom. Like you just naturally feel guilt and panic. Like you always have something to worry about and you always have something to worry over. But I feel like for me, it kind of goes a little deeper than that. And maybe it is because I fear continuing generational trauma, or, feeling like, okay, like you still know that I'm your mom, right? Like you still know that, like, you know that I'm mommy, right? Things like that. But definitely by being put on the right medication, and I really hope if anyone takes away anything, to not listen to the negative stigma about being medicated and not being like in fear that if you are on medication, you're deemed to be crazy or like whatever the case is. I really think that by being put on everything that I needed in order to like organize my thoughts and like my feelings, that it helped in the long run. And I really do feel like that is something that I can overcome because of it. And it's giving me tools of coping. So before, like you say, like we have coping mechanisms. You learn that if you go to therapy, like you're taught different forms of coping mechanisms to deal with either like bad thoughts or feelings or like urges or whatever. But when you're in that state, it's really difficult for you to get into a rational state to think like, okay, start coping. Like start thinking, what are your coping mechanisms? Start breathing, like whatever works for you. That's easy to think of when you're in a healthy state, but when you're not in a healthy state of mind, you don't think of things like that. So by being on medication, I'm able to kind of like not like disassociate, but compartmentalize from like the depressed part of me to like the rational. It's like I'm like having a conversation in my head of like what to do, or like, okay, like that you felt this way before, so like what are your tools that you can lean on, you know, and I don't know if I would have gotten to that point had I not gone and seeked help.
Right. So medication's been one of the biggest things for you.
For sure.
What about being a waitress? Like how has work helped you? Does that help you? Like feeling like you have a job and somewhere to be? Or how do you manage like being a new mom while also being a cocktail waitress? Because those are definitely different personas.
Different worlds for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to say, like, I've been working for a long time in my life, since I was 15. So, I really love working, and I love, like, working for something. Excuse me. I love being active and having something to call my own. Now, when I first was pregnant, I had this idea that I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and that was it. And I'm very fortunate to have a relationship where that is an option. Like, if he had it his way, I would just be a stay-at-home mom. I wasn't expecting to be hit with postpartum so bad, or at least I was hoping that that wouldn't be the case. And I really thought that by having him, that would not even be a thing. Like, I would just be like so happy and in love with motherhood. But that wasn't the case. And I definitely needed an outlet. I think being isolated at home was really, really difficult too. And it changes things, you know? And this idea that like all your friends should come and check on you and everyone should like, you know, constantly be there for you. Like, it's just not realistic. People have their own lives, unfortunately. And it does get isolating. Like, you do get very lonely. And so after about 4.5 months, that's when I auditioned and
4.5 months, that's a good bounce back.
Yeah, no, it was I try not to like, I don't know, snapback culture in itself, it's its own like toxic thing, and I hate that any moms feel anything less than powerful for giving birth to their baby and not being in love with their bodies. But I am compassionate. Like, I understand body dysmorphia is a real thing. You're given a new body. And like I said, shout out to my mental health that I just couldn't keep food down, or I just couldn't eat enough, and you know, I trimmed a lot of weight quickly, but yeah, I auditioned really quick after giving birth, about 4.5 months after I started. I think I saw a therapist after a month. I got on medication for a couple months, and then I was able to kind of like get into a rational state. Auditioned, and when I got it, I was really excited. I had this idea that I'm only going to be working weekends and then spend the entire week with my baby, and that's ideal. You can make like a week's worth of money in this job without having to work that full week. So it was super ideal. But I remember even texting you about it in the beginning because those hours scared me. Even though I was struggling with postpartum, I still always wanted to be with my baby. It sounds really crazy. Even though I was passing the baton off to my mom, I would be in the room. Like, I would be right there, you know? So I always wanted to be with my baby. I always do want to be with my baby. But working for me gave me an outlet of like my own identity. Even I'm still trying to figure it out. I always like make jokes because I don't think there's ever a day at work where I don't talk about my son. I don't think we have ever had a shift together where you haven't heard Frankie being brought up one way or another. And I mean, I'm always going to be a mother first, no matter what. But before I was a mother, I was myself. And now I'm trying to refine who I am outside of being a mother. And that in itself is hard. I don't label myself as a cocktail waitress, but it does give me an outlet. It gives me a sense of socializing with people my age. It gives me like a cool experience. I get to meet a lot of really cool people, and it feels good to like make my own money without being dependent on my partner. And like I said, I'm blessed because it is an option. It's not a priority, or it's not a, what's the word I'm looking for? Necessity, yeah, thank you. It's not a necessity. Like you said, a lot of women have to go back to work. They're not really given a choice in the matter. So it's really been a blessing, but it does come with a lot of downfalls. I do feel guilty every day. I do miss him every single day. I miss bedtime kind of often, which that part really sucks for me because I only see him in the morning. But it's only 3 days a week. So for the most part, it is working out for me. And then you do have, I'm not going to name names, but you have
people that make comments.
people that just
because there's a party culture that comes
yes,
with being a cocktail
yes.
waitress, and you have every right to engage in that
Right,
culture.
right.
But you get comments from people about
all the time.
You can either be a party girl, sexy cocktail waitress, or you can be a good mom.
Oh,
and
yeah,
they're
the
not
combination
mutually
of
exclusive.
No, they're not at all. It's actually funny because I get the exact amount of comments on both ends of the spectrum. So for women, and it's crazy because it's women that are supporting. Women see me going out and they'll like swipe up and be like, I just want to say that I love the fact that it looks like you're balancing motherhood and your social life. Like, good for you. It's actually really inspiring. I've always feared that if I had a kid, I wouldn't be able to do both. And so it's really cool to see you be able to do both. Like, keep going. And then you have men that make little jokes. And it's, first of all, everyone's always asking the moms. They're not asking the dad. And like, that's its own separate topic about, the expectations on moms versus dads. But they're always asking the moms, where's the baby? Where's the baby at? And I always make this joke whenever anyone asks me, I'm like, oh, I just left him a bowl of food and some water. He has the doggy door. Like, where do you think, like, my baby's fine? You know what I mean? Like, no one would ever ask a dad, like, who has the baby right now? And then I've had, like, people that have made jokes about me constantly going out and how they're, someone's particular, like, made a joke about me. They're like, Jasmine's always out. And I made a joke back and I was like, it's because you're always out. Like, I see you out. So that's the only reason why you can say that. And then he hit me back with, well, at least I'm not a mom. And I was like, okay, like, what is me having to, not that I have to explain shit to anyone, but me going out late at night while my baby's safe at home in bed with his father is not going to make a difference in my motherhood experience. And it shouldn't make a difference to you. Like, it shouldn't matter. But yeah, you definitely get, comments on both ends of the spectrum, and trying to find that balance and trying to balance the freedom in it, or letting myself feel free, and then also like feeling trapped in the guilt has been pretty difficult, but I think I'm managing it for sure.
I think you're managing it too.
Thanks.
What is the best way that you would say someone can help a mother who's experiencing postpartum depression?
I think the whole traditional, like, checking in, bringing meals, things like that could be really, really helpful. But just be ready to listen. And I think, I don't know, this might be asking for a lot in today's society, and this is not to be controversial or to be political whatsoever, but using kind words is so important. Like, I didn't realize how much I didn't want to seek, I avoided being on medication for so long, which is something that helped me. So it could help a lot of other mothers. I'm not like saying that that's the route that they need to go. But if there is someone who does need to go that route and yet they're scared because we use the word crazy so much. So by just being kinder with our words and being a little bit more empathetic and compassionate, I think goes a really long way. I think by using such judgy terms, it robs people of like seeking the help that they really do need. So doing our best as a society to just not stigmatize mental health or believe in the stigmas of it, and just like offer a listening ear is like a really big one too. Just feeling like you're not alone.
Okay.
In it.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that I haven't already covered?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you so much for your time and for your story. If any of you guys would like to continue this conversation with Jazz, I will have her contact information available to you on Instagram and YouTube. If you want additional information and more insight into postpartum as a whole, again, I highly recommend checking out that documentary I mentioned earlier in the episode titled When the Bow Breaks. There's just so much insight and realness to that documentary. It's obviously super intense and very heavy, but that's just the reality of postpartum depression. Thank you guys all for your time, and I will see you again in 2 weeks to talk more elephants.